This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. It's tax season, and we're all a bit tired of numbers. But here's one you need to hear. $16.5 billion. That's how much the IRS flagged for possible identity fraud last year. Now here's a good number. 100 million. That's how many data points LifeLock monitors every second. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed. Save up to 40% your first year at LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
This podcast contains adult themes and language, and some of the things that we discuss may be disturbing to some listeners. In this podcast, we discuss sexual assault, torture, race, and murder. Listener discretion is advised. Please take care of yourself.
So now we're going to get into Priscilla Ford's early life. What do you got for us, Beth?
Priscilla Joyce Ford, née Lawrence, was born on February 10th, 1929 in Michigan to parents Lucille Marion Minnessy of Michigan and Richard James Lawrence of Tennessee. Priscilla was the sixth of 8 children, all of whom were born in either different parts of Michigan or different states. So it appears that her family moved around a lot when she was young. Her youngest sibling was 11 years younger than her, and her oldest was 2 years older.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So this is an aside by Minnie, and she says being moved around a lot as a child is definitely not good for the mental health of that child.
Right.
Beth and Minnie had been moved to at least 8 different homes, a couple of them motels,
Wow.
in 4 different states, both West Coast and East Coast, by the time Minnie was 11 and Beth was 13. And they can confirm it can really negatively affect you.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to lead to murder, though. So far, Beth and Minnie haven't killed anyone that they're admitting to.
Thank you for that. Minnie, I am just cackling reading your asides. Growl, Minnie. And I also, this is an aside, I am so happy that because Minnie has also, Beth is very private. I don't know if you all have noticed this. We don't know much about Beth, and I love getting these details. So back to Priscilla. She was married to her first husband, Dewey George Ford, in 1946, right out of high school when she was only 17 years old. She had 2 sons with him, born in 1948 and 1949, and her father passed away in 1948 when she was just 19 years old, 2 years after she was married.
In 1952, she divorced Dewey. A book that she wrote many years later called Where Heaven Is Now, though full of veiled, convoluted rambling, implies that he was likely abusive. Priscilla married again in 1953 to a man with the last name of Page and divorced again in 1954. She then married William Scott in 1956.
Priscilla reportedly had a very high IQ at 140. So even though, she only had a high school education, she was able to find a job as a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in Dowagiac, Michigan in 1957. She was the first Black teacher in the area and is remembered as a gifted, caring teacher. And she would have been 28 years old at that time. And she kept her job as a teacher from 1957 to 1966.
In 1962, Priscilla gave birth to her third and last child, Winter Scott. She divorced William Scott in 1965 when Winter was still quite young. The previously mentioned book that she wrote implies abuse from him as well.
Now we're going to get into the timeline. So Ford's first arrest was in 1957 when she shot her husband in alleged self-defense and then shot herself, but both survived. She was 28 at the time and she was arrested, but there weren't any available details about a conviction for this. So sorry. There were apparently no charges filed. It's also unclear whether this was before or after she became a teacher, as it is reported that it occurred in the same year.
Ford left Michigan in 1966 1976 with her daughter Winter, moving from place to place in various states, taking whatever job she could find. During this time, she began to develop an obsession with religion and began to tell people that she was Jesus.
Whoa.
That escalated quickly.
You didn't it, though?
She was married for her fourth time, sometime after this, to a man with the last name of Wagner.
Okay. By 1970, Ford's behavior had become noticeably more strange to friends and family. According to them, she said that she kept seeing her dead husband, her first husband, Dewey, who had died in 1959, across the street from her home in Buffalo, New York. She also apparently thought that she was Adam and Jesus Christ reincarnated.
Wow.
That's
a lot.
That is a lot. Impressive.
In 1972, one of Ford's sons returned from his service in the Army to find that she seemed delusional and was habitually drinking more alcohol than she used to. During this time, she was also arrested on more than one occasion on minor charges for a variety of things, each time being released.
She separated from her last husband in 1972, and her children say he died after the separation, one day after she told them, quote, "I hope God strikes him dead," unquote.
Wow.
At one point, it worked. At one point in 1973, now living in Reno, Nevada, Ford voluntarily committed herself to the Nevada Mental Health Institute, where she was treated and released. They assigned her the diagnosis of passive-aggressive personality with hysterical episodes. Wow.
Yeah. Passive-aggressive personality is not really considered a diagnosis because it's not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM.
Mm-hmm.
It is considered more of a behavior that can be symptomatic of other conditions. And I listened to a great episode on passive-aggressive personality disorder on Psychology in Seattle.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I've shouted out before.
That's right.
The host is Kirk Honda, and he's a Asian man, and he's really smart and interesting. So I recommend you guys give it a listen. But anyway,
subscribe.
This was a patron-only episode, and yeah, I'm a patron. So.
Of course you are. Of course.
And I haven't listened to it in a while because I listened to it a while back. But off the dome, I believe Kirk explains why he thinks it should be a diagnosis and why it's not in the DSM. The reasons being mostly political.
Interesting.
And I had no idea so much of what gets put in the DSM or taken out is based on politics within the mental health community. That was eye-opening.
Get out of here.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow, thank you for gems dropped. The person exhibiting passive aggressive behavior might not even be aware of it, as it is a way of dealing with negative feelings when a person doesn't feel like they can directly express or deal with them. And I believe it's a sign of trauma. And it is also a behavior that a person can learn to modify with enough therapy. So it is not necessarily a permanent part of a person's personality.
Some contributing factors are being punished as a child for expressing anger or negative emotions or opposing thoughts or feelings, not having learned how to assert oneself during childhood, and disruptions in a child's relationship to authority figures such as parents, caretakers, or teachers, which sounds to me like it could, in some cases, be a product of racism.
Look at this bitch. This Beth, it does it again. That's why she's my favorite white lady. So some examples of passive-aggressive behavior are acting hostile or cynical, acting stubborn, blaming others, or complaining about being unappreciated. Ford definitely did exhibit these behaviors.
Ford was arrested yet again in 1974, this time for trespassing, and as a result was required to undergo another mental health evaluation. Her daughter, Winter Scott, who was 11 at the time, was removed from her care and eventually placed in a foster home with relatives, as it was determined that Ford could not adequately care for her.
That's also a traumatic event for a mother. So Ford considered this to be kidnapping, and she didn't think there was anything wrong with her, and she continued to believe that she was Christ reincarnated. For years, she insisted that her child was stolen from her and insisted she had no idea where she was. Though some officials say they had been trying to find her to contact her about Winter, and others say she knew perfectly well where her daughter was the entire time in LA with relatives.
After this arrest in 1975, 1984, she moved back to New York, where she sought help from Catholic Charities in Buffalo. A nun there described her as delusional.
Oh.
While in New York, she continued to commit minor crimes, resulting in her arrest, such as theft, drug possession, and writing bad checks.
Crimes of survival, though.
Yeah.
So she was treated at more than one mental health facility, one of which was in 1979 in Buffalo, New York, where she was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. She told a counselor during this time that she had a fantasy of running crowds of people over with a car, killing them. She said, quote, "The people of Reno will pay in death," unquote, for taking her daughter. Whoa.
In 1980, now living in Maine, Ford attempted to hire an attorney to get her daughter back for her. By this time, Winter would have been almost 18 years old.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Ford allegedly told the lawyer that if no one helped her get her daughter back, then she would drive across the state and kill everyone she saw along the way.
Oh.
And this reminded Minnie of Milton from Office Space when they took his stapler saying, "I could set the building on fire."
Oh my God. Vengeance is mine. Whoa, Minnie.
Hi, I'm Matt Harris. Seton Tucker and I host the podcast Impact of Influence, which for 2 years covered in depth Alec Murdaugh, who was eventually convicted in 2023 of murdering his wife Maggie and son Paul. That story continues to evolve, and we will cover that. Plus, we will tell you stories of other true crime events that have happened in the South. Please join us on Impact of Influence. And give us a follow on the Impact of Influence Facebook page.
Ohio is a land of mystery, from missing shipwrecks and lost treasure beneath her surface to strange phenomenon slicing through her skies. From myths that have evolved around historic events and people to the unsolved murders and disappearances that keep her communities wondering what happened. Find Ohio Mysteries on your favorite podcast app, and let's explore the inexplicable. OhioMysteries.com.
So in November 1980, Ford was intending, or was she now, to drive to San Francisco and ended up stopping in Reno. In Reno, of all places. Who'd have thunk it? And she went there to cash a check. And she just somehow needed to cash this check in Reno. What a coincidence. And then she decided to stay in that city of Reno. And as you can probably tell, kind of like an individually wrapped potato, Minnie is not buying it. And I just thought, who would buy an individually wrapped potato? So,
they sell them.
They do?
Yeah.
They do?
They do.
No.
It's like a microwave potato.
What? Oh my God.
That's one of those things when I go to the grocery store with Minnie. She always goes on rants about these potatoes.
Wait, I've never seen one before. It's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
And who would need
Who would
it?
buy that?
Wow. Okay, so here we are. Priscilla Ford is in Reno. She finds a job as a package wrapper at Macy's.
On November 27th, 1980, Thanksgiving Day, after a morning of heavy drinking, Ford decided to go for an afternoon drive. And I hear that's highly recommended after a morning of heavy drinking,
Wow.
kind of drive the alcohol out of your system.
Sure.
Just kidding.
Oh my God. Yeah. As somebody who has had struggles with alcohol use, morning drinking never ends well.
No, it does not.
So she started out driving on the road normally, as if cruising, headed northbound on Virginia Street. I wonder what her playlist was. Between 2nd Street and Douglas Alley. She then began to increase speed, then intentionally swerve into a crowded sidewalk and continued driving, hitting as many people on the sidewalk as she could along the way.
Yikes.
Wow, intense. So police estimate that she drove about 100 feet on the sidewalk, up to speeds of 40 miles per hour in a huge vehicle. That Lincoln,
Yeah,
that
the Lincoln Continental. It
is
is a
nothing to
boat.
be fucked
Yeah.
with. Yeah.
Ford then swerved back onto the road and kept driving, but ended up stopping in traffic 5 blocks later. Police caught up with her at a red light, pulled her out of the car, and placed her under arrest.
The deputy district attorney that day, John Oakes, said, quote, "I was dispatched down to a hit and run. I thought they were kidding me. It's Thanksgiving. I got downtown and it was a fucking war zone.
Wow.
There were bodies and shit everywhere. It was carnage. People were crying and ambulances were responding. It was a clusterfuck," unquote. Wow.
Yeah.
This deputy district attorney is keeping it real.
Yeah. And here's a fun fact interjected by Minnie. In Canada, instead of saying clusterfuck, they say gong show.
Okay, Canada.
Because they're so nice, you know? They can't possibly say clusterfuck.
I'm sorry. I can't say the F word.
Although gong show is pretty good too. I like it.
It evokes a sound in my head.
How about a fucking gong show?
Okay.
Yeah, that's what
Look
I'm gonna
at
do.
Beth molding the two worlds together.
As she was given tests to determine her blood alcohol level, Ford referred to the people she had hit with her car as beasts and pigs.
No.
She killed 6 people and injured 23 others. Some of the injured felt the effects many years later, such as Bob and Shirley Hahn, who were hit from behind as Ford drove on the sidewalk.
Shirley commented, quote, "We figured the only thing that saved us, there was a fellow right behind us. The car hit him and killed him before it hit us. We've felt it ever since. Bob just went to the doctor. He can't turn his neck like he used to. His leg still hurts him," unquote. And the awful thing is that we have to consider Bob and Shirley to be lucky.
Yeah. 5 people died at the scene. Their names are Iva Britton, 80 years old, Jolene Cranmer, 20 years old, John Coachella, 60 years old, Paul A. Nitzel, 73 years old, and Josephine Starkey, 50 years old. One of the injured later died at the hospital, and we were unfortunately unable to find their name.
And as I said earlier, one victim died 1 year after the injuries sustained.
Yeah.
And that person's name I do not know. So, but rest in power to all of them.
Yeah.
A local television station reporter, Karen Zupan, had said that at the same location where the incident occurred, not 5 minutes before, she had been conducting interviews with people asking them what they were thankful for. Whoa!
Holy crap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh my gosh. So now we're going to get into the investigation and the arrest. Hit it, Beth.
There was no question that Ford was the one who had driven on the sidewalk and had killed and injured numerous people in doing so. She was arrested without any struggle at the scene, surrounded by multiple witnesses. Officers at the scene described her as being exceptionally calm.
Well, she was very faded.
Yes, true.
So, which could have contributed to her demeanor. Now, while she was waiting for the results of her blood alcohol test, she also easily admitted to what she had done and expressed no remorse for it to the officers at the scene. As they held her, they did have to keep the crowd away from her, as more than one of the witnesses expressed wanting to kill her for what she had just done.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
A witness at the scene said, quote, "She came right at us. She came right at us with a body still on the hood of the car, and she looked like she was looking for somebody else to hit," unquote. Wow.
Yeah. And I can imagine the crowd being angry, but I also must say, I imagine they might have been angrier because this was a Black person.
Yeah.
And I can also imagine that there were probably a lot of N-words being thrown at her direction.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and not to it doesn't justify what she did. I'm just saying.
Just a comment.
Yeah. So Deputy District Attorney John Oakes, AKA Mr. Keeping It Real, was assigned to monitor her and spent about 5 hours with her. He described her as having a remarkable mix of calmness and callousness. He said, quote, "She looked at me point blank and said, 'How many people did I kill?' I said, 5 or 6. And she said, 'Good.' She was very placid, like just another day. Very matter of fact, very matronly, motherly. She was acting self-righteous, like she was justified in what she did. We couldn't figure out why at the time," unquote.
Police interviewed 40 witnesses at the scene. Ford's blood alcohol level turned out to be twice the legal limit for driving at 0.162.
Oh my God.
Yeah, she was fucked up, man.
She was fucked up. So now we're going to get into the trial. So in December of 1980, Priscilla Joyce Ford was indicted for 6 counts of murder and 23 counts of attempted murder. Ford was represented at trial by Washoe County Public Defender Lou Carnahan, who decided that the best possible defense for Ford would be insanity.
On January 29th, 1981, Priscilla Ford was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial. The judge in the case ordered that she receive mental health treatment so that she would, at some point, be competent to stand trial.
On August 6, 1981, the district court decided that she had recovered enough from her illness to be declared now competent to stand trial, and jury selection could begin. Jury selection and trial preparation took months, and her trial did not begin until November 12, 1981.
Judge John Barrett gave instructions to the jury that they must decide among 3 possible verdicts. These verdicts were innocent, innocent by reason of insanity, or guilty. Priscilla Ford's plea was entered as innocent by reason of insanity.
The judge further explained to the jury that in order for her to be declared innocent by reason of insanity, she must not have understood the nature and quality of the acts, must not have had the capacity to determine right from wrong, or must not have known she was doing wrong when she committed the act. So in that moment is what they're judging her for.
Right. In order to prove that Ford was not guilty by reason of insanity, Carnahan called 4 psychiatrists and 19 other witnesses to testify for the defense. Carnahan also presented a great deal of evidence that detailed her previous hospitalizations, arrest records, medical history, employment, and education.
That's some good public defender lawyering, right? Psychiatrists for the defense submitted a diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia with religious delusions. She apparently thought she was Jesus Christ and that she was doing drugs and that she had the right to kill, something like an avenging angel. Wow.
Yeah.
She also claimed that she was incapable of sin as she was the Messiah.
Well, makes sense to me.
Hey man, if it looks like an individually wrapped potato and sounds like an individually wrapped potato, then it's an individually wrapped potato.
A police officer who had been with her at the scene said that Ford had calmly explained that, quote, "I deliberately planned to get as many as possible. A Lincoln Continental can do a lot of damage, can't it?" Unquote.
She's not wrong. Where is the lie? So the car she was driving was this 1974 version of the Continental, and it does kind of look like it could do double duty as a battering ram. The car had a huge front end. I think that's an understatement. Is there a bigger word for huge? And was gigantic, and was equipped with a large, solid metal bumper and big grille.
The same officer also testified that Ford said, quote, "I am a New York teacher. I'm tired of life. I want attention. I'm sick of problems. In June 1980, a voice told me to drive through a crowd at a theater and kill as many as possible. But another voice said, she's too much of a lady to do it," unquote.
Wow.
I don't know why, but that just, I'm too much of a lady to drive over people with my car. That's just...
Wow.
Tickled
this
my
is
funny bone.
interesting. She's interesting.
Yeah,
I
she
will
is,
give her
definitely.
that. Now, according to Ford, Senator at the time, Edward Kennedy's wife, Joan Kennedy, had told her via a voice in her head that she didn't have what it takes to actually do it. She said she tried to resist the idea, but that she was goaded into it by the voice in her head.
Per Minnie, maybe the voice in her head told her simply, in the famous words of Rihanna, to shut up and drive.
Whoa! Okay, Minnie, hip hop air horns for you for invoking Rihanna.
And she also says that she knows she shouldn't poke fun, but this whole thing is just too tragic otherwise. She feels for the victims, also doesn't want to ever know what it's like firsthand to live in the hell that schizophrenics must live in.
Mm-hmm.
And humor is her go-to defense mechanism. And, we must be sisters.
Right? Yeah. So apparently Ford thought she had a special relationship with Joan Kennedy as well as with other celebrities at the time. Oh, really? She also obsessively identified with the Seventh-day Adventist Church co-founder Ellen White, who she did physically resemble somewhat.
During the trial, Ford took the stand. Her attorney advised against it, calling it public suicide, but she did it anyway, claiming she was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, Adam, and or Ellen White.
Wow.
She at one point testified that, quote, I am human and I am divine. I don't like it any more than anyone else does. I don't want to be divine, unquote.
I don't want to be so awesome. I just am.
I can't help it.
Wow.
It's not my fault.
So at one point, oh my goodness, at one point, her daughter Winter, who was 19 at the time of the trial, also took the stand and testified that her mother had taught her to smoke marijuana at the age of 9. And this would have been in 1971 when Ford's mental illness was becoming more and more apparent. She was likely self-medicating with marijuana and alcohol, as some accounts do say that she didn't want to stay on the medications that she was prescribed for her mental illness.
Winter also testified at the trial that her mother often talked about planning to have Winter artificially inseminated so that she could give birth to the next Messiah.
What now?
Yeah.
Come again? I'm 9.
Yeah.
Mom.
Oh,
so the prosecution held that Ford might have been delusional, but that she did indeed know right from wrong, plus showed signs of having planned the murder. So she did not meet the legal insane qualification as it pertains to criminal acts. Their proposed motive was that Ford was angry that she wasn't getting the attention that she thought she was entitled to.
On March 19th, 1982, the jury of 7 men and 5 women found Ford guilty of 6 counts of first-degree murder and of 23 counts of attempted murder. 9 days later, on March 28th, the jury voted in favor of the death penalty, though that penalty was never carried out. At the time, the death penalty in Nevada would have been by gas chamber.
Jeez.
When she was sentenced, Ford said, quote, I would like to be left alone to die in peace, unquote.
By the time the trial had ended, it was then the longest and most expensive trial in northern Nevada's history, having lasted 5 months almost. Close to 100 witnesses had given testimony and over 500 exhibits had been presented by the defense and the prosecution combined.
She later told a jailer she, quote, did what she had to do, unquote, and that the people she hit were, quote, just pigs, animals let out in a wild place, unquote.
Whoa.
For the next 18 years, Ford continued to go through appeals processes while she remained on death row in southern Nevada.
I was going to say, Beth taught me that the appeals process is also a process that the victims have to participate in as well, which is not fair. It's traumatic. Yeah. It's not good. So the DA for the prosecution, Cal Dunlap, said years later that he still agrees with his efforts to get the death penalty for her at the time. And it should be noted, more Black people get the death penalty than white people, disproportionately. According to him, quote, the reason I went for the punishment I went for wasn't because I thought she would ever be put to death. It was the best way that I knew how to assure that she would never hurt anybody else. In those days and since then, the mental health people have let people go. The mental health people have let people go, and the parole people have let people go. And people who have killed again, they shouldn't have been let go. People who have the death penalty to deal with don't get out at all, or they get out a whole lot later than those who are convicted of first-degree murder without the death penalty, unquote.
Dunlap also said that he didn't believe in her mental illness, that he thought she was faking it, and that he thought whether or not she had any mental illness was irrelevant to the trial and sentencing. I agree to disagree. Or maybe I don't agree. I just disagree.
Not at all. Not one bit.
He just wanted her out of society. He later wrote, quote, a person who is murdered is just as dead when killed by an insane person as is a person killed by someone with no mental disorder. The family and friends of a victim suffer no less because the death is caused by a person who is mentally ill or insane. Indeed, often the death is more difficult to accept because the victim has done absolutely nothing to provoke the wrath of the killer, unquote. Well, that's one way to look at it, I guess.
I guess. Dunlap
it's not about,
noted. Yeah.
It's not really about that, but okay.
No, okay. So keep in mind when the death penalty verdict was pronounced for Ford on March 1982, this was less than a year after the then newly elected U.S. president, Ronald Reagan, had repealed most of the Mental Health Systems Act of 1980 that had been signed in by former President Jimmy Carter for the purpose of providing grants to community mental health centers.
This set up a sort of community attitude of disregard for the struggles of the mentally ill and an unwillingness to accept that ignoring the mentally ill will ultimately do more harm on society than understanding and treating them would.
Yeah, this is a perfect example of why mental health should be taken seriously. So,
Yeah,
big
and why it
mistake.
should be an important
Mhm.
is something that our society disregards and
Absolutely.
should not.
Absolutely. Yeah, we want to be a better society and keep everybody safe and well should be a
Including,
priority.
everybody, the
Yeah.
mentally ill, society as a whole, everybody.
Absolutely. So the long title of Jimmy Carter's signed bill was a bill to improve the provision of mental health services and otherwise promote mental health throughout the United States and for other purposes. When Ronald Reagan repealed it, one of the effects was a reduction of care for mental health patients so that many of them could no longer be effectively cared for. In the coming years, some who were in care were released from that care and left to their own devices. That's a shame.
Yeah, it really is. In the early 2000s, Ford's defense attorney, Lou Carnahan, said that the case really affected him. Even 21 years after the case, he said, quote, "My firm belief was that she was legally insane, even under the strict McNaughton test. If the jury had found the facts as I believe they existed, she would be in a mental hospital, not in prison. I certainly respect the jury and their efforts, but I think they made a wrong decision in their interpretation of the facts. I think she should have been found not guilty by reason of insanity and placed in a secure facility such as Lakes Crossing. I believe she would have been there for the rest of her life," unquote.
Yes, and I mean, in prison, there is no mental health treatment.
No, right.
So at the time she was sentenced, she was the only woman on death row in Nevada. As we've discussed in previous episodes, it's actually pretty unusual for a woman to be sentenced to death. It makes you wonder if she'd been white, would she have received the same sentence? And I'm going to say no.
"3 a.m., the comedy horror podcast that holds weekly gatherings around the campfire. Let me tell you what you're going to get. You're going to hear stories about demonic possessions, prison stabbings, skinwalkers, glitches in the Matrix, cult leaders, missing 411, night marchers, Operation Paperclip, Mesopotamian devil worship, and so many monsters it'll give Kanye West a runaway for his money. Pop and meme culture also aren't off topic. A camp where laughs and scares are constantly competing for first place. We're just a group of friends, trying to bust each other's balls, find the best stories, and expand the circle in the process. 3 a.m., the comedy horror podcast not for the faint or fragile of heart. Let's go."
So now we're going to get into where are they now? What do you got, Beth?
Over the course of Ford's incarceration, a date had been set for her execution 5 times, but each time sanity hearings and or death penalty appeals for a variety of reasons stopped the execution from going forward.
On multiple occasions, she tried to argue that the Thanksgiving Day murders were actually an accident because her car had malfunctioned. Sure, Jan. So her car had been thoroughly examined and it was determined that there was nothing wrong with the car that would have caused her to suddenly and accidentally really drive into the crowded sidewalk on that day. Yeah, okay.
Though her execution was stayed multiple times, in the end, Ford died anyway. She died of emphysema on January 29th, 2005, when she was 75 years old. She'd been a heavy smoker for years. She died after she spent 18 years incarcerated at the Southern Nevada Women's Correctional Center, never having taken responsibility for what she had done.
Oh, wow. She stuck to her story until the very end, I guess.
Yep. Well, she was mentally ill, so she probably thought she was justified.
Absolutely. So that leads us to our takes, our hot takes,
Yeah.
what we think about the case. So let's share Minnie's thoughts, shall we?
Okay.
So here's what Minnie has to say, y'all. She said, I just kept going back and forth between hoping that she's since been reincarnated, not as Jesus, but as a Thanksgiving turkey, and hoping that she's found some mental peace. Wow, Minnie, it's Minnie's comedy hour today. So it makes you wonder, if she had received more adequate care for her mental health issues, would this have happened at all? And another thought she had, speaking of mental illness, menopause. No kidding. That shit fucks you up and no one warns you about it. It's true. I am fine. I'm not in menopause, but it really does affect you. And I mean, people talk about hot flashes, possible cholesterol rising, and osteoporosis, but no one talks about the hormone surges like the ones you had when you were a teenager, making you feel crazy like a teenager again, or reduction in memory, feeling exhausted, dizziness, changes to your cycle resulting in iron loss. Wow, that can make a normal person feel like they're starting to lose their mind. And how does that interact with the brain chemistry of a schizophrenic? I don't know, but I'm thinking it's not good. And she was 51 at the time of the murders.
Yeah,
and
so it's
Minnie,
definitely.
wow, thank you for the hot take,
Yeah.
Minnie. I had not even considered the
Yeah, me
possibility of her
neither.
age and
Yeah.
hormone imbalances and
Definitely
changes.
could be a factor for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Minnie.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm thinking untreated mental illness and substance abuse exacerbated by racism.
Put that in the DSM.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that she identified with Adam and Jesus, who are both, they're portrayed as white
Yeah.
and they're both male.
Yeah.
So
That's-
putting on
yeah.
my psychologist's hat, and
Okay.
I'm not a psychologist, but
That's okay. That's okay.
as a Black woman, she most likely felt powerless, and thinking she was Jesus or Adam or both gave her a sense of power and control.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah.
Another interesting, beautiful take. You
Yeah,
two,
so-
Minnie and Beth, I'm just going to sit back and let you finish. What's that? Look alive, y'all. It's crazy out there. Bye.
Bye. So, I don't think any of this was conscious,
Yes. Yeah.
And she was schizophrenic. So whatever she was thinking, I totally disagree with
the
jury,
prosecutor. Yeah.
the
and
jury
the jury
and the prosecutor.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think she was mentally ill. And if she had not been mentally ill, she never would have done this. So that's
I
just
agree.
my thought. Yeah.
Yeah, and she wasn't either, even though there was clear evidence of her mental illness with her medical
Yeah.
records,
Yeah.
that she
Like,
was
hello.
not, yeah, she was not afforded the privilege or right to be seen as a human being with
Yeah.
mental illness and treated as such.
Right.
And so it starts with an R and ends with an acism.
For sure. Yeah.
So she was born in the 1920s during Jim Crow terrorism. Segregation and violence likely played a role in her everyday life. And as I mentioned earlier, it's likely that either a parent or grandparent of hers was an enslaved person, and
Right.
abuse perpetrated on those who recently came before her, and that she experienced in America, probably contributed to fucking with her mental health.
Right.
And I'm no OG of true crime like my friend Beth here, but schizophrenia is complicated.
Yeah.
And I think Minnie mentioned most who suffer from it are not violent.
Right.
But I've heard a lot of podcasts because I'm fascinated by mental health podcasts of people who live with schizophrenia.
Yeah.
And just describing their experiences. I can't speak to it, but it is complicated.
Yeah.
And Ford was clearly mentally ill, but never received adequate or lasting care. And society's failing to take care of our citizens who are mentally ill, as the great Jimmy Carter tried to do, but Ronald Reagan fucked it up for everybody.
Fucking Reagan, man.
Yeah, fucking Reagan. Why do people like him so much?
I don't know.
I don't understand it. But failing to take care of mentally ill folks or marginalized folks who need help hurts all of us.
Yeah.
All of us. And what happened that fateful day, Thanksgiving Day in Reno, is clear evidence of that. What more evidence do we need that we need to do better?
Yeah. Agreed.
Oh, I love it when all our minds come together. Look at us solving things. Beth, where can the people find us?
Our website is fruitloopspod.com, and we use Fruit Loops Pod for all of our social media.
This is a weekly podcast, and new episodes drop every Thursday. So until next time, look alive, y'all. It's crazy out there.
Hi, I'm Sean McCabe.
And I'm Carrie McCabe.
We are, well, married, obviously, but we're also obsessed with the darker side of things.
True crime stories, alien abductions, poltergeists. If it leaves you scratching your head and keeping those lights on at night, we want to hear about it.
That's why we host the podcast Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie.
Every week, we bring our listeners a true story guaranteed to send chills down your spine. From history's most brutal serial killers to the mystery of spontaneous human combustion.
Yep, lots of these stories leave unanswered questions behind, and you'll get to poke through the rubble of the evidence with a hardened skeptic and
someone whose mind is more open to fun.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
You can find Ain't It Scary with Sean and Carrie wherever you get your podcasts, and on social media at Ain't It Scary. Come play with us.
I'm an American vigilante. I have a question for you. What would you do if someone you cared about was abducted, taken from you? Would you call me? Would you care about how I got them back? Download American Vigilante now.